Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm Andrea Wade with Grant Engine Accounting. Some quick housekeeping. We will run this about 60 minutes. Last 15 is typically saved for any questions that you have. So if you have any along the way, drop them in the chat and we may answer some as we go. Um, so Here's why we're spending this hour together. Audit trouble rarely starts with doing something wrong. It happens when you plan to figure it out later, and then an agency asks for proof. Today, we're going to cover what auditors actually test, where teams get tripped up, and the systems that keep you ready. You're hearing it from both sides of the table today, the people who build audit-ready systems and an auditor who actually performs these audits. So let me introduce everyone to you. Today, you're going to hear from Sam Tetlow. He's the founder and CEO of Grant Engine and Grant Engine Accounting. Sam has built a proven model for funding life science companies through NIH, SBIR, DARPA, BARDA, and other DoD sources. Next, you're going to hear from Nick Butterly. He is an audit partner with 10 years in public accounting and deep experience in federal grant audits. Nick is the auditor in the room, so when he tells you what gets pulled and tested, that's the view from the other side of the table. And we've got Neil Henry, who is our Senior Director of Operations with Grant Engine Accounting. Neil brings more than a decade of grant accounting and compliance, and he designs the audit-ready systems that companies rely on across the NIH, NSF, DoD, and beyond. So that's our hour. Keep those questions coming as we go. And Sam, over to you.
Amazing. Thank you, Andrea. I'm really excited to have everyone here. And I wanted to just start with a couple of views that we've learned over the years about why effective accounting matters. And then I'll hand it over to Nick to get us rolling on that real deep, valuable content. Um, Accounting, especially in a government arena, is about order and having a structure that delivers. And that order provides a framework and a reliable bedrock that provides that security and assurance that your project is following the rules. And that order that comes out of accounting also creates an impact of culture and dynamic in executing the aims of your project, whether that's a defense contract or a life sciences grant. The act of having good order and effective execution in your accounting that will naturally show up as a very clean audit when that occurs is an unlock for the structure and the effective set of experiments or activities that you need to do when you're actually running your grant in spending the funds to realize the goals of the grant that would be an unlock for future funding. That's true for contracts just as it is for grants. So that effective order here is useful for obviously spending the money inside the lines, which is necessary in government funding. But it also is an unlock for your delivery of your project. And those things are synergistic. And we see that with our clients because they have confidence in us and it works very well. Um, Another crucial aspect, and we're really pleased to have Thomas, Judy, and Tucker here as represented by Nick Butterly as one of the audit firms that we use well, and they're an excellent group. The essential component of the integrity of spending your tax dollars via grants and contracts is that they are um, independent. All right. And on this call, we're pleased to have both the auditor and the accounting firm that delivers that both of those pieces. But it only works well if the auditor is independent. We wanted to, in that spirit of staying inside the lines and driving outcomes, we're happy and very pleased to have a leading or the leading audit firm in TJT with Nick Butterly here as an independent group, and that it's that independence that drives value. And we're here today together to share how this play and interplay works well. But independence and objectivity is the hallmark of success, and that is how we do things always, and that is certainly going to be true as you engage, with us. Um, the one thing I just want to say before I turn it over is that actually two more things. First, why, and we'll recap this at the end, but why you would want to engage with any outside firm to do accounting. And certainly you need to do that with an audit, but why on the accounting side, and also why Grant Engine accounting. And the first rule is that we give you a process and a team that delivers your project to always be audit ready, right? And building that capability and tools and reporting out from the jump is less expensive, way better than trying to figure it out later, and less risky, which is perhaps most important to Andrea's point. We always stay inside the lines of the rules, which is also mandatory. But those rules have flexibility in them. Not that you're bending the rules, but the rules are firm. And within those firm rules, there are things that are appropriate about reclassifying costs or no cost extensions or replacing key personnel and a litany of many, 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 many other things that are inside the lines of the rules, but provide you with flexibility that is a necessary ingredient as you execute in a research and development or product development environment. And that flexibility enables success, which is the reason why you got the money in the first place. But if you don't know what rules are flexible and which ones are not and how to leverage them, you're not giving yourself the biggest advantage. And that's what we bring to our clients. Um, the grant, of course, or contract will always pay for those services as well. So that's a nice feature as well. I'm really pleased to have um, Neil Henry, our very own senior director at GE Accounting. Neil has a great way about him in both knowing and applying the rules in a flexible way, but also just great to work with. You get those two things together in a single person, there's something really self-motivating and inherently valuable about working with a partner. And Neil's a good representation of all of the members of GE Accounting that deliver that for you. The so that's GE Accounting. To get a little bit more about what we do and where we are as a company at Grant Engine, I'd welcome you to visit our website. We have a pretty vibrant blog as well. Our LinkedIn page is really useful. Um, and I'm going to share one quick tool that we are about to release, which is at least for the defense side, a SIBR sitter planning calendar for the life sciences side, SBIRS, TTR. But this is a nice tool that allows you to put in your dates of when you're going to submit and plan ahead. Let's say you're dropping for September 5th. You put it's the 8th, but you put in the 5th, and it gives you a calendar. Let's say you're going after a fast track. It gives you the calendar of review scoring, award decisions, how long your phase one is, and just a forward look about most likely dates of when these milestone items happen, and then the soonest that they may happen or the later that they may happen, because as we see with the government, shift happens, but this tool is really useful. So that will be up on our LinkedIn and in our webpage here in due course, but there's one of many tools that we're going to come. So without further ado, Nick, I've known the Thomas, Judy, and Tucker organization personally for 20 years now. We use them often with our clients, and I know some of the partners there. I've had the honor of getting to know Nick in within the last few years, and a great gentleman and an expert in the audit world. So without further ado, Nick, I'll turn it over to you to get us rolling on deeper content.
Sure thing. So first off, thank you, Sam and Andrea. That was very kind and humbling words from you. I would like to include Sam in all my Zoom meetings because, it really bolsters the ego and gives me some confidence ahead of talking. So I appreciate the kind words. Um, I'm an auditor at Thomas Judy and Tucker, as they've mentioned. Thomas Judy and Tucker is a North Carolina-based accounting firm. We provide public accounting services, so that looks like tax compliance, audit compliance, and a litany of other services. We are based in North Carolina, but we are able to provide audits through various states around the country. So just because we're North Carolina based doesn't mean we can't, work on you if you're based out of, California, for example. So the goal for this webinar is to one, educate you, and then and first off on what an auditor, me, is thinking about when I'm looking and working on an audit, and then two is Neil's going to step through, provide some areas of expertise from the accounting and how he can bolster your various processes. Um, Moving on to the next slide. So why does an audit matter? An audit, is not just a compliance item. It's not just a way to check a box. There are tangible, um, you know, pros that come out of an audit. An audit helps, with your, managing your funds. It helps develop processes as well as provide accountability. So, a federal agency, it's important when you are a recipient of federal funds, that, you know, an independent firm like Thomas Judy and Tucker provides an audit and says that these funds are being used for their intended purposes. Um, from the company's perspective, like why is an audit good, right? It helps you continue to maintain a strong relationship with the federal agency that you're working with. Could reduce surprises, help mitigate fraud. Um, because we're working on your processes, and then as well as just develop a strong series of processes. A smooth audit is sort of like an oxymoron, right? Is not necessarily about super complex matters, but what's important is that there is a essentially a narrative that is being followed, right? We have developed a strong um, series of controls. We are consistently following those controls, and they are being done timely. So, why does it matter? Um, we've discussed why it matters, but kind of moving on to when or when it's required. So the old requirement was based on expenditures in excess of $750,000. Starting January 1st of 2025, that number has moved up to $1 million. So what's important here is that it is based on expenditures. It's not based on, your award amount. It's not based on how much you've drawn in the current year. What matters is, or not drawn for that matter. What matters are expenditures. Um, and it's not just direct expenses, it's your fringe, your indirect, your various fees that come with it. There's a litany of other costs that go into it. So just looking at your direct expenses isn't necessarily um, just oh, I don't need an audit this year. That you very well might need one. Um, it also has a 9-month reporting deadline, right? So most companies that I believe Grant Engine works with are calendar fiscal years, and that would mean reporting is required by 9/30. So that would mean that, hey, don't wait until September 15th to start reaching out to your accounting firms about needing an audit because it won't be possible to be done. For us, if everything runs very smoothly, in an audit, from start to finish will take 5 to 6 weeks. We like to build, we've worked with Grant Engine for a while, and we like to build significant wiggle room. So, a lot of times we'll build, 3+ months of wiggle room in order to meet reporting deadlines. Those reporting deadlines are, we're not taking the audit and turning around and submitting it to the federal agencies. An audit is owned by the company. So, it is up to the company to turn around and upload those to the correct federal agencies. Uh, for-profit companies, what you want to start with when you have one of these grants is you want to start with your notice of award, um, and then kind of build your way down. You want to read those in detail, and then you want to ask yourself, are we a direct recipient of this award? Are we a contractor? Are we a subcontractor? There's all sorts of paths that, kind of divvy from these notice of awards. And what's also important is what federal agency is providing the award. Some agencies have very special rules. The NIH and DHHS provides allows for program audits. If you meet certain check marks and certain requirements, and a program audit just looks at just the grant alone. So we're just looking at those expenditures and revenues related to that grant. But what's important here is Neil sharing the screen is at the far right. When you're unclear about what needs to be done, you can always ask your grant officer, or two is ask a contractor or someone with a specialty of, hey, what do I need to have done here? Do I need a full financial statement audit? Do I need just a program audit? Do I even need an audit? Et cetera, et cetera. Because those people are the ones, with the know-how and the expertise, and will be able to guide you in the correct direction. At a high level, this is kind of what a program audit looks like. We want to look at the awards. We want to prepare a schedule. We want to map out your compliance, test your controls, and then have report and follow up. Where, an independent auditor steps in, as in steps, essentially 3, 4, and 5 is your compliance, your test of controls, and then your report and follow up. It is up to the recipient, and the contractor for step 1 and 2 is to be able to identify your awards, identify your needs, put some schedules and reconciliations together, which, Neil will discuss later. And then moving forward is then take a look at your compliance requirements. Read in detail those notice of awards. You want to then, contract with an independent accounting firm to perform an audit, and then have the reporting requirements that are then uploaded to the DHHS. What's important is, management and the owners of the company are the ones who, own the records. They, at the end of the day, own the audit report. And then, we as auditors come in independently, and we evaluate your internal controls. We take a look at your ledgers. We take a look at, whether those internal controls are consistently being followed, whether there's proper support, etc. Oh, yeah, next on. So, perfect segue. Thanks, Neil. We evaluate the processes before we test dollars. As an auditor, we are required to evaluate your internal controls. We put together, narratives, and first off, we understand that oftentimes small companies have limited resources. And so they only have so many sets of eyeballs that can look at, a certain transaction. Contracting with a third party is helpful in divvying up those forms of controls. So what we do is we step in and we evaluate your internal controls, and the goal here is like I said earlier, and we're going to keep harping on it, is that there is a repeatable set of procedures. The evidence, you have evidence that those procedures are being followed. You have proper coding. There's records of it, and then yeah, it's being followed. Um, we evaluate and test controls, but we also test transactions as well. And that's kind of in your third area there. Um, you want to be able to have, various grant projects and project codes. You want to have budget categories, um, documented um, sources of approval. And then, what really matters too is that the coding, you know, we want to look at your direct expenditures and your indirect costs and ensure that those are classified appropriately. Good coding will help with, allowability of expenditures as well as, help with any sort of reporting issues too. And then at the very end, review and reconciliation. If you have a set of processes and you're doing the right things, you also want to make sure that there's someone reviewing those reconciliations and reviewing, making sure there's a second set of eyeballs. Um, you want to ensure that the reports, the drawdowns, bank activity, payroll records, and general ledgers are being reviewed on a timely basis. Um, you know, Having those procedures 6 months later isn't going to help you or benefit you as a company. Um, you can go ahead, Neil. Here are some examples of things we look at as auditors. These three categories are what, me and my team will 100% look at. We will be looking at your cash receipts. We will be looking at your cash disbursements. And we will be looking at your payroll. And the number of transactions tested varies, but it could be up to 25, it could be over 25. And like we said earlier, what's important is that there is a set of processes that have been established. They are consistently being followed. And then further on down the line, they're being coded correctly and reviewed in a timely manner. For looking at cash receipts, what we do is want to look at your grant drawdown report. What we want to do is then trace that through your general ledger, um, as well as review any sort of reconciliation differences and assess how those have been handled. Cash disbursements, those are your expenditures. What we want to look at is for invoice and vendor support. We want to look at purchase orders, contracts, whether there's approval, proof of payment, whether the cost has been allocated correctly to the correct grant or, is deemed unallowable. And then we also want to look at the period of performance of when it was done. Sam talked earlier about and the importance of being able to provide this information timely. Um, this is an area, tracking down invoices and tracking down support and tracking down various processes is often where inefficiencies show up and how could lead to a significantly higher audit fee for us because we are on a hourly basis. So having, a set of processes that are followed consistently can help, be able to provide a lot of this information timely. Um, Payroll, what we want to look at is, approved timesheets. If you have employees that are working on various grants, you want to make sure that their timesheets are being approved, are being allocated correctly, and then you have payroll register support, as well as employee pay support. One thing we kind of harp on, and Neil can attest to, is that pay rate, substantiated, and how? not just, hey, here's the amount. What we want to look at is making sure that those pay rates are substantiated and deemed reasonable. Um, and then, at the end of the day, did that transaction, what we're looking and thinking about is, did this transaction belong to the company? Was it coded correctly? And has it been approved, timely? What counts towards that threshold? Um, we're gonna keep talking about it. It's based on expenditures, so your actual cost incurred. It's not based, so that, when you're required to audit, it's not based on when you drew the funds. It's not based on your notice of award or the period of the award. It is based on your expenditures for a year. So um, when you're, evaluating whether you need an audit, it's important that you consult with somebody to determine whether you do need an audit, because it's not necessarily always clear from just looking at your expenditures, um, or your grant drawdown reports, that you're tracking this information accurately, and timely, so you can determine, whether you do need an audit. Um, you know, Oftentimes, there's changes to the awards, disbursements to subrecipients, use of loan proceeds, et cetera. So, making sure that you have detailed subledgers will help determine um, whether, you meet your need for an audit.
Excellent. Yeah, Nick, thank you so much. That was incredibly valuable information. And Sam, please
Hey,
go ahead.
yeah, sorry to intersect, but I thought about doing poll questions when I was going, but I would suggest if you don't mind, Neil, let's
Yeah,
do
absolutely.
two back-to-back poll questions. And Andrea, if you want to run us through those, and Dan, if you want to serve up the first question. These are relevant for just to help us get a context of how the audience is doing accounting today. But I'll turn it over to Andrea, to you to MC these two poll questions.
Sure. Thank you very much. And thank you, Nick. That was a very clear, practical look at what auditors are actually testing and gives everyone here, a real sense of what to expect. First question we have here is, how are you handling your accounting? These questions help us to read the room and aim the rest of the session at, where you actually are. All right. Uh,
Yeah, I think you can share, Dan, now the answers, and then the audience will be able to see that mix of. And Andrea, why don't you walk through the results?
okay. Looks like most people are using a firm. And we do have a few that are doing it by themselves here. All right. And Dan, you want to give us the next question? All right. So for this one, I am aware and understand the federal regulations under the current administration. All right.
I'd say, yeah, that's not shared yet with the audience.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So it looks like we're a bit in the middle there. All right. Well, that is very helpful. Thank you, everyone. And Neil, we'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And yeah, just to reiterate what I was saying, Nick, greatly appreciate you being on this call today. I always think it is so valuable to get the auditor's side of the story when you're building these systems, because there is no one size fits all solution here. there is a lot of gray area within these kind of black and white rules and regulations. So it is what I like to do when I'm helping someone set up one of these systems is I don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? I want to make sure that what you're doing is ticking all the key boxes without having to completely reinvent the systems you already have in place. Our job is to tell a story and provide the information that is going to be useful and informative to an auditor if and when you have to go through an audit. So, in a kind of sick way, I get excited about the prospect of an audit, right? Some folks will lose sleep over it, but it is very much an opportunity to test these systems. And we've partnered with Nick and TJT for so long. We have a great working relationship with them, and they know. And I think a key item to think about here is it is a best effort. You want to just put forth your best effort to make sure you're demonstrating that you are attempting to follow all these kind of key compliance items. So with that, I'll just go through, we'll touch on each of these in more detail, but key items, and some of Nick's slides touched on this already. Do you have an appropriate chart of accounts set up within your accounting system? Can you track expenses appropriately? Can you segregate costs appropriately? On the timesheet side for the key person effort, do you have some system that tracks their effort with approvals and submissions documented clearly, whether that's a timesheet, in Excel or a paper timesheet or their payroll system, or there's some timesheet systems out there that are digital now. Have you allocated labor appropriately? That's a big one that we see folks they get their award and it says, oh, no, I was awarded X dollar amount for effort. I wrote in my salary as this on the award, and I was going to put in 50% effort. So I'm just going to take this, I'm going to draw down this incrementally over the course of the grant. Can't do that. You have to demonstrate that you're actually getting paid these amounts and you've actually put in the effort. On the purchasing side, can you tie back the scientists who are working on the project to the finance team or whoever's actually entering that information and considering that a direct expense on the project? We always recommend that you have a robust budget tracking system in place to track your budget to actual, because that's going to inform how you draw down your funds. And then, of course, kind of key item over the overarching theme here is, do you have robust internal controls that are repeatable and that are easy to follow and that are testable from an audit perspective? Let's see here. Okay, so key item number one that I always like to tell folks going to be tested, no way around this, is can you segregate costs appropriately? I'm sure all of you are familiar with your accounting systems and maybe looking at an income statement or a profit and loss. You're going to have your chart of accounts where you list out your supplies, your wages, so on and so forth, right? The key additional step when you get one of these awards is, can you further segregate these expenses into an additional bucket? Now, the NIH wants you to define those as the direct expenses for any active project, whether you have one or multiple, your overall company indirect expenses, your fringe expenses, weird subset of unallowable expenses that you do have to track separately, and then any other internal, company funded, investor funded, customer funded projects. You need to be able to segregate those out. So there's multiple ways to do this depending on the accounting system you're using. If you're using QuickBooks, if you're using, some folks are just tracking stuff in Excel, or there's many other accounting softwares out there. But, the ones that we see frequently are class, customer, or project tracking. The key here is, can you kind of build out that segregation that is required to show the allowability of costs? I like to think, the cost segregation, you have clean support, you have fast reporting that has good documentation behind it that you can stand behind. And then, fewer coding questions during field work. If you have a report that you can pull directly from your accounting system to provide to the auditors, where you show by a line level detail of all those direct expenses on any given project, that is going to make your life easier, and it is going to make Nick's life easier when he's reviewing all these schedules that we upload. project cost ledger. So this is kind of what I'm alluding to there, but this is specific to those direct expenses for any individual project. So do you have a way in your accounting system to pull all of those details easily? And do you have a way that you can do that, uh, you know, for any given time period? So an auditor is going to look back to the start date of your award based on the project period, your notice of award. Now, Nick said something very interesting there, which is key, and a lot of folks try to kind of work around this, which is that your audit threshold is built on your expenditures. Doesn't matter when you draw the funds. A lot of folks we work with will say, "Oh, well, I'm at $900,000 in January. I'm just not going to go over, or in December, I'm just not going to go over that $1 million threshold to trigger the audit." That doesn't matter because what matters is the actual expenses that are going into your project. So the direct expenses, the underlying fringe, indirect, and the SBIR fee. Your project cost ledger is what's going to inform that. So if you run a report that shows you're over that $1 million threshold from an accrual accounting basis, that is what triggers the requirement for the audit. Maintaining this project cost ledger is key, and it's one of the non-negotiables when you get one of these awards. And that's the key kind of item you have to build out on top of your existing accounting system. So I like to, the why it matters. I like this system, even if you don't necessarily have grant or contract. We work with a lot of folks that maybe they're in between grant years and they continue using this because it gives you really valuable business information. Once you start, taking your product to market, you want to know what it costs on any individual project that you have. So this gives you really good visibility. So you can really tell in a nice, clean way what each project is truly costing you, what your profit margins are, that sort of thing. Gives you clean budget to actual reporting. So running these reports, comparing it against your approved budget in your grant makes it very easy. And then, of course, the overarching theme here, good trail for the audit. Time tracking systems. This is always a big one that we get pushback on when I'm working with a firm. There's no real way around this, right? Nobody wants to sit around and fill out a timesheet. Most folks that we're working with are senior level employees, and they've been working in various companies throughout their career, and they no longer work on an hourly basis, and they don't want to keep track of their time. They just want to make sure that they're completing the aims of their program. That's great, but you have to be able to prove how you segregated your salary because that's what feeds the reimbursement portion. So in the audit, Nick's team will do sample testing for payroll periods to make sure that every individual that touched the grant and had any portion of their salaries and wages reimbursed through the grant funding has a record of how they spent their time. Now, there are many different ways to do this, but the key here is, can you track all the hours worked, and not just on the grant, but your 8 hours in a day if you're lucky, or your 10 hours or 12 hours, right? And then can you back that into some sort of system that is repeatable and that is time stamped and approved by some sort of supervisor or peer. Now, there are some single member LLCs out there that we work with. Again, it's just about documentation. So if you're the PI/CEO and you have no active employees, we still want to have that record. We want to have it time stamped. I kind of alluded here. So the timesheets are how we feed into what we call the labor distributions, which is really just the allocation of wages across the various projects. So if you're using Excel or Clockify or MC2 Anywhere, T-Sheets, there are many different softwares out there that do this, but you want to be able to say, if you're making $100,000 a year, or if an employee is making $100,000 a year, what portion of that salary is allowable to be reimbursed under the grant? To do that, you have to have documentation for how they spent their time in any given month, and importantly, over the course of the project. This system also makes it really nice and easy when you're doing your interim or final progress reporting for reporting effort. So key personnel list proposed effort when you submit your grant budget. You have to report on that because if you deviate significantly, if you put in too little effort, that is something that you will get dinged on. Having a system to keep track of that effort over the course of the project makes that very easy to kind of attack head on if you need to make any changes or go back to your grants management specialist for approval. Let's see here. Purchasing process. So this is a big one. I've worked with a lot of people that say, well, my grant budget is this. I had this expense, so I'm just going to use the grant to pay for it. You can't do that. You have to have a clean line that shows this was a allowable necessary item that was purchased and used for the project to advance the aims of the project. And you have documentation in place that shows the end user requested it, allocated it to the award, indicated that this was in fact a direct expense and is going to be used on the program. And then you have some clear distinction there between that person handing that information off and whoever's ultimately entering that in your accounting system. Now that can be purchasing forms for every expense you have. It can be, there's some good softwares out there, bill.com. It can be an Excel sheet at the end of the month. But the key is you have to have some documentation that shows the reason I called this a direct expense is because the end user told me they purchased it directly for the project. Loosely speaking, these are going to be items that tie back to what you originally submitted in your budget as well, for the most part. Budget tracking. So this kind of maintains the schedule of how you spent the funds. It ties into your accounting system, but is usually maintained as just a simple spreadsheet. In your notice of award, you're going to have high-level budget expense categories that are going to coincide with what you submitted and hopefully got approved in your grant. There's a nice amount of flexibility inbuilt in these awards, but you have to be tracking your spending to make sure that you're not approaching or deviating significantly from those thresholds. Also, within these awards, you get certain allowable reimbursements for fringe expenses, indirect expenses, and then your SBIR fee. These are very much unlocked as a function of your direct spending, so incrementally. So you need to have some documentation that shows I drew X dollar amount on this date. This is why. So that is very much a part of, in the last 18 months, updated requirements within payment management system where the NIH draws are occurring. You need to provide a lot of information for exactly why you're requesting any dollar amount. So you can't just submit a dollar amount anymore. They want to know the why. And if you don't provide sufficient information, they're going to come back and ask or deny your request. Maintaining that budget to actual tracker is going to be key over the course of your project. And it's something that we always provide to the auditor for any individual award. The timing as well. You want to make sure, having an invoice in your hand means it's a real expense that you're able to get reimbursed for. But you need to prove that the timing wise works. So you can draw in advance, but they only give you 2 business days in advance. So the idea here is you draw the funds, you don't sit on it long term. A lot of people we've worked with think you can just draw all the funds up front. It's not how it works. You need to show that you've incurred the expense and then it incrementally gets unlocked. Which goes into the drawdown process. How do you know how much to draw invoice? This is where your budget tracker coincides with your accounting system. So you need to be able to run a report within your accounting system. That's that project cost ledger to see any new direct expenses. Plus, I always like to check the project to date for any changes. Maybe something was recategorized after the fact or a supply got returned. You tack on your fringe benefits on your payroll piece. So they might give you 25 cents on the dollar on top of any direct wages. And then you get your indirect on top of all of the above. So you might get, somewhere between a 15 and 40% indirect rate that's incrementally locked, and then usually somewhere between that 7 to 10% SBIR fee. But again, this is something that you have to, your draws all have to be based on reality. So real expenses, real payroll that are backed up by timesheets and a solid, robust system for recording things and maintaining all that documentation. And then, yeah, the internal controls. This is something that everyone needs to maintain, and any auditor is going to check this. So this is just, it doesn't have to be a big scary thing. It just needs a high level describe your processes, and you need to make sure that you are sticking to said processes. So, do you have appropriate approvals for grant-related transactions? So the direct expenses. Do you have proper segregation of duties? Which again can be hard for small companies. That's where we help. We help build out systems that make sure you're still ticking those boxes while not making it overly complicated on your end. So kind of control takeaway there, show who checked everything, when they checked it, and what evidence you have. And does it tie back to your overall accounting control document? So yeah, again, coincide. So show how it's worked. Do you have spreadsheets? Do you running reports? Are you saving receipts? Are you saving, travel documentation? You can do this many different ways. Handwriting on pieces of paper that you printed out. Having an Excel. There's, softwares out there that you can store all this documentation as well. But the idea here is show you're trying and be consistent once you set up your system. These are items that we see a lot of folks get tripped up on in audits. It's 6 months later, and Nick and team have requested evidence for certain invoices or receipts. Like, well, I threw that receipt away, or I never saved that. That's where you get dinged because it shows you do not have a good control system in place. So they don't have to be overly complicated. They just have to be repeatable, and they have to actually be followed. So again, consistency matters. And with that, that's the kind of key items that we like to focus on, and we like to help any new client coming in. We want to make sure no one's losing sleep over the audit. It is something that is part of getting these awards. It's the administrative cost to it. And it's a very important piece. But yeah, nothing to lose sleep over. Cool. Any questions?
Yeah. Outstanding. Maybe in the MC role, Andrea, you could pose the questions that we haven't answered.
Of
Yeah,
course.
like Kumar had maybe the first one.
Okay. Yeah, so Kumar asked, what documentation do we need to keep for indirect expenses?
Yeah, and I can tackle that as well. So you just need to prove that they're allowable indirect expenses, and that justification can be done via coding within your accounting system. I usually recommend that folks at least annually, if not monthly or quarterly, are reviewing any indirect expenses that they've considered or allowability. And then same idea as any direct expenses. Keep invoices, keep receipts. All of these items can be tested. Just because it's not a direct grant expense does not mean you don't have to go through these same robust controls of keeping your documentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Neil. We
Yeah,
got
of
another
course.
question from Jennifer regarding the 1 million cutoff requirement for an audit. Are costs considered an expenditure at that time an invoice is received or when it is paid?
Yeah. This is a bit of black and white, but we typically, if you're focusing, if your accounting system is set up on an accrual basis and the audits are very much done on an accrual basis, it is the date listed on that invoice or when the work was done. So it's not when you paid for the invoice, it's the date on the invoice that is important.
Okay. And then from Chris, is it necessary to have written details of how the time is spent besides just the time assigned to different projects, classes with timesheets?
Yeah, it can just be high level, which is good. The idea is you don't want to make it too administratively difficult. You just need to high level show how you spent that 8-hour day. Now, NIH can always come back if you submit a draw and say, prove that you worked 100% of your time this year on this work, but they're not going to say, show me what you did last Tuesday at 2 p.m. Do you have a lab notebook you can share and tell me the exact details you did?
Okay, and then some questions that Sam posted in here that came to him. Does the 90-day look back that occurs upon NOA happen for the phase 2 portion of FT as well as the phase 1?
It does, yes. And those are certain items that you can always get permission from your grants management specialist to go outside of those windows as well. So keeping track of any of your direct expenses in between projects or prior to actual project start dates are key, because just because it's outside of the window of your award that's listed on there doesn't mean it's not necessarily reimbursable. You just might have to go through a few extra steps to get it approved.
Okay, and does that 90-day look back also apply to defense, space, and like it does for the NIH?
Most of the time, yes. It depends on the actual language written into the contract. So
Okay.
NSF awards can be slightly different. DoD awards can be slightly different. It just depends. Again,
Mm.
the clarity can come from your grants management specialist.
Okay. And from Chris, can you explain match project codes to work performed?
Um, yeah, so I'll talk as I think I understand this question. So project coding things to work performed is, so there's the accounting side. The direct expenses just need to be coded to a specific direct project that you set up for any individual award. On the labor side, it's just going to tie back to those timesheets. So you just need to make sure that anything that is considered as a direct expense or direct time, that the individual can assigning those codes to the either that time or the expenses knows that it is specific to any individual project. Does that answer the question there? Hopefully.
I'll go on to the next one here. Um, what documents are typically requested by NIH after closure of a phase 1 grant?
Yeah, great question. So you will provide a high level summary of the expenditures on the project. You do not have to provide invoice level details or timesheets. There is reporting that is done on high level scientific summary. So how did you perform against the listed aims in the program? And then you're also going to be reporting on key person effort. There are a lot of yes, no, not applicables that go into more details on kind of the scientific side, but from an accounting perspective, it is really high level, and the onus is on the firm that got the award to maintain this documentation in case they ever ask for more information. But typically speaking, it's going to be high level during the reporting portion.
And
Awesome.
next question, how much should I budget for a potential audit? Any ranges?
Yeah, great question. I think Nick can probably answer this, but it depends on what they find when they start looking under the rug. I think lately we've seen somewhere in the range of 12 to 18,000, maybe depending on the scope and complexity. It can go up from there for if an audit drags on, and then if they have to start billing at an hourly rate that goes above that. Is that about right, Nick?
Yeah, I was gonna say it depends on all those facts that you said. So size, number of grants, number of employees, where you're located. Sometimes we have to jump through some additional hoops if you're located in a specific state. Um, yeah, so it sort of depends. But that's a good range Neil provided.
Yep.
Okay, and
And important, sorry, one last thing on that. Importantly, and Sam mentioned this earlier, that is an allowable indirect expense, your audit expense. So you're not getting paid back directly from the grant for it, but the indirect funds should cover that. And that's part of what those funds are there for.
you answered that one before I could read it.
Oh, good.
So one of your slides listed both indirect cost and fringe benefits as categories to keep records of. What is the difference between those two?
Yeah, great question. So the fringe benefits, they are solely added on to direct labor. So typical fringe expenses are payroll taxes, which are going to be somewhere in the 8 to 10% of any dollar of wages that you incur. employee benefits, so health insurance, dental insurance, 401k match, certain other employee benefits. You have, we've seen some creative ones over the years. Those would be specific to fringe expenses. The indirect are more general company overhead items. So your rent, office supplies, paying administrative staff, that sort of thing.
Okay. And how do we need to substantiate pay rates? NSF asked us for a substantiation before we receive a grant, but not NIH.
Yep, great question. So they're substantiated during an audit by actually looking at payroll records. So the salaries and wages that you propose and submit as part of your budget don't matter as much as what you're actually paying folks up to the NIH salary cap. But for any dollar that you request reimbursement on the wages side, you have to have timesheets, you have to have payroll reports, and you have to have some documentation of the rate that you agreed to originally pay this employee and make sure that your payroll register matches that rate.
Okay. And if an audit is necessary, how many years will the audit need to cover?
Yeah, great question. So, one, right? For the most part, unless the auditors start looking and say, hey, you should have been audited in prior years as well, which we do see happen every once in a while. But assume that if you in 2025 cross that $1 million threshold, they will only be looking at 2025. There are a few months that they look at in 2024 and 2026 just to check for any of those expenses that might have carried over from the period. But for the most part, you're just looking at 1 year at a time.
And the last question we have here is, oh, another one just came through. So second, oh, and more. Okay. Spoke too soon. What states have additional hoops for the auditor? If the auditor is located in that state, does that remove the additional hoops?
Yeah, great question. Nick, I think there's just some additional kind of
Yeah.
requirements in the reporting, right?
Yeah. What notably comes to mind is New York is a big hoop in that we have to go through and pay a bunch of costs as a firm to be able to audit a company located in the state of New York. I would say most states make it very easy for us to work with. So once again, it sort of depends on where you're located, and then we'd have to do some investigations of just confirming that, there are no additional hoops or costs that we would have to incur in order to be able to issue an audit report for a company located in that state. But most of them are pretty straightforward.
Okay. And when
Andrea,
you have,
start if you're moving, I'd say let's sorry to interrupt you in your flow, but respectful of everyone's time, let's serve Dan up the third question now, which is in your inbox on your screen.
all right.
And at the answer to that, yeah, then we can move. I'd say let's, as folks are answering that, let's keep answering. Keep going, Andrea.
Okay, great. Yeah, the question here is just asking if you would like for us to contact you. The next question that we have in the chat here is when you have more than one grant, example two, do you have to divide indirect costs equally to both grants, or is it better to pool all indirects into one account and pay all indirect expenses from that account?
Yeah, great question. Indirect expenses are inherent to the company, not to individual awards. So you want to keep track of your indirect expenses for the overall company, not by grant. The important piece you need to be able to kind of prove is, do you have rates that are commensurate with the awarded amount?
Okay. And for SBIR Phase 1 award, if the PI is a founder of the small business and performs general company administrative functions, such as bookkeeping, oversight, payroll, coordination, or grant administration, how should that effort be treated for budget purposes? Should the PI's general administrative effort be received through the company's indirect cost pool if properly documented?
Yes. It should. Those are great examples of indirect wage expenses. So maintaining a timesheet that allocates time actually spent by direct time, indirect time, fringe time, other company activities is going to allow you to allocate their entire wages by those various categories.
Okay, and that was the last question. If 1 million threshold is passed during phase two, will audit include the prior phase one?
Only the portion that is in the year in question. So if you have a phase one award that ends in say February and you get your phase two, which is a larger award later that year and you cross the $1 million threshold, they're going to test any grant that was active in that period.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much for all those questions. And for anyone who answered the poll about wanting to be contacted, we will be reaching out to you shortly.
Amazing. Nick, Neil, Andrea, outstanding work. Thanks for everyone for joining. Well, Andrea, you're our MC. I'm going to leave it to you to put a bow.
Sounds good. No, thank you everybody for your time today. We appreciate you guys being here. And thank you very much to our guests here, Neil and Nick, for answering everyone's questions and giving wonderful presentations.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Enjoy your day. Take care.
Nick, Neil, Andrea, let's jump back onto this Zoom after Dan closes it out so we can do
Okay.
a quick break.
Okay.
Yeah, amazing.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.